Hi, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. Thanks for being here, those of you who are in the synchronous Zoom meeting. I'm just going to write down your names for attendance purposes, and then we'll get started.
Hello, class and professor.
What's up, Tom, Precious? How you doing?
I'm doing good, and you?
Pretty good.
That's good. I mean, if I was doing bad, do it really matter?
Would want to know? Like, I would extend my sympathy.
Well, thank you. Because
Yeah,
I was reading an article, in my German class about how in America we say, "How are you?" And it's just a way of saying hello. It's not any oomph behind it, as in really, how are you? I don't want to sit here for 3 hours and listen to how you are, you know?
it's a good sociological lesson about language and context. So, like, we often say things we don't really mean. And like, if somebody did, like, like, oh, my back hurts and my girlfriend just broke up with me and I have no money, it would be like, no, man, I was just saying hi.
Exactly.
It's just,
Exactly.
it's like words are not always meant to be taken literally, and like, it context matters more than substance, and you have to be able to read social cues,
Yes,
you know.
for sure, for sure. And it's crazy how in different places they're all different.
Yeah,
It just shows you how small, like where we are, how little this is compared to everything else. And then if you really want to blow your mind, think about outer space. Like, oh.
yeah, totally. I mean, it's a good sociological lesson about like, what is it? People call it culture shock, right?
Yes.
Like if you've traveled overseas and you have, or anywhere, even like some places within the United States are like culturally different than others, and so you
Yes.
can you kind of realize that this whole kind of way that you've taken for granted socially um, is not the only way of doing things, and it's you kind of have this like fish out of water, realization about
Yes,
how things
sir.
could be different, and how like
Yes.
the way that we do things are kind of arbitrary.
Right? It is. Like I'm a truck driver, so
Yeah,
when I was over in Montana a while back, and their bank was like literally a wooden log, like a log cabin. And I'm like, I have never seen that in California. Never. Like our banks are secure, but they have gun laws, they can carry open carry and stuff. So it
yeah,
was just surreal for me to see that.
cool. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's just like different parts of the country. It's like a different society.
Yes.
Jill, I think your voice is on it, or the audio is yeah.
Sorry, I thought I came in muted.
It's all good. Thank you. Okay, we'll get started. Um, I'm really excited to read the German ideology with you today. It's one of my favorite texts by Marx. I think it's a good way of introducing um, some of Marx's key ideas about what he calls historical materialism, and the concept of ideology. Um, Before we start that, I'll get some kind of logistical, nuts and bolts things out of the way. So I have put your next perusal reading assignment has been created. I might as well go to the screen share here and pull up my the perusal page just to show you. That. Okay, so this one, um, unlike this week, I'm gonna make this due on Monday of the following week, so that is September the 22nd. And that's the way I'd like to kind of do things from now on. Going through today, I realized that you had your reading assignment due today, but for the reading on the German ideology, which we hadn't covered yet, and so I'd like to avoid that in the future. So, for example, for next week, in Monday's class, we'll be doing the reading on alienation and estranged labor from what's called the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. And then on Wednesday, we'll look at the Manifesto of the Communist Party. And then the following Monday is when your readings and annotations will be due uh, for this class. So the reason I do that is that I think that, or at least I hope that it's helpful to have me kind of go through these readings and annotate them with you here in these Zoom sessions, and then for you to do your comments and questions and such after we've had a chance to go through these readings. Of course, like, you don't have to wait for me. If you feel like you learn better by doing the reading before class, then by all means, go ahead and do that. But I imagine for most of you, at least, that it'll be more advantageous if I'm able to go through the readings in these live sessions with you, and then you can kind of read along at your own pace. So today we'll be going through the German ideology, but like, you've already submitted your comments and annotations. So I will have some conversations that we've had online to comment on. um, Been pretty interested to like read your comments and questions and the conversations that we've gotten into through by way of the reading. I do like that part of perusal. The part of perusal that I'm still having difficulty with is with the grade book and syncing the grades. There's no reason for you to worry about that, except insofar as if you go to Canvas and you look at the grade book, it looks kind of like a mess right now. Um, but Perusal has been um, scoring and grading all of your assignments, and so and I have been giving attendance credit to people who have been showing up here in the Zoom meeting, and everybody seems to be doing just fine. It's just that like the organization of the grade book looks a little bit messy, but there's no reason to be concerned because your grades are definitely being recorded. So I worked on that some today, and I have to make kind of another pass through tomorrow. Basically, it's a long story, but basically, like, somebody else was supposed to teach this class, and then they had preloaded the Canvas site with their grading scheme, and so I can't really change that around, and so I have to figure out how to sort of make it so that it's more clean and self-explanatory when you look for your grade. So that's the part. It's been a kind of an epic technological struggle here in the beginning, but I assure you that things are going to get worked out, and I appreciate your patience that you've shown through this process. Any questions from those of you who are here before we start with the German ideology?
Sorry, really quickly, the
Yeah.
BBC documentary, we just are required to watch it and then make the post on Canvas, we aren't required to annotate it, or are we?
That's correct. Did I put that in there?
You did, but when I go to, I think I went to Canvas and you were just talking about this, with the grades. Or I think, yeah, the grades, it shows, it says like BBC documentary Karl Marx. I guess that's just it says attendance and a participation. So I just wanted to make sure we weren't required to annotate it.
Yeah, no, there's no requirement for annotation. And I realized that it was a little bit confusing because I put it on Canvas under the module first, and then I put it as a perusal assignment, so that you would get, credit for watching it. I think that what I'm gonna do, is just like that. If you did that second assignment, um, you know, you'll get credit for having watched it because obviously, like, you watched it in order to do the assignment.
Okay, thank you
Um,
so much for.
Jill, your thing is back on.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you,
Oh, I'm
really quick.
sorry.
Are we required to watch things on perusal to get the credit for it moving forward?
Yeah, moving forward,
Okay.
basically what I'm saying is like I didn't really realize that that's the way it was supposed to be done.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is the only real long documentary that you have to watch for this class anyway. So yeah, like if you do the assignment, I'm just gonna give you credit for having watched it. Um, I'm sorry, Kai. Did you haven't? I think I kind of cut you off.
Oh, no, no, no. I was just, thank you for clearing that up. No, thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Professor, I
All
have
right.
a question. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so I went through everything, the perusal, and it keeps on like having the little red dot. So I was kind of worried because I did, like, for example, the documentary, I went through it and everything, but that one is not red, but the other ones are red. Do they remain red, the little red dot, even if we worked on it? Or how does that go?
I don't know because I don't know what the little red dot is.
If I feel like it's unread or something, it keeps on.
Oh.
That's what I do. I've gone through all that. And then, does anybody else have a little red dot on theirs and they worked on their assignment?
Yeah, I think it's just because he hasn't fully learned how to work perusal that he don't know how to remove it after we made the comment. But what I do when I see the red dot, I just click on it and it'll tell you right there in the little box how many comments you have made to that assignment. And if you see it, just go to the next.
Yeah,
That works for me.
Is
what
there
I
something Precious, are you saying there's something I'm supposed to do that?
Yeah, because once we comment in perusal on something that we have already read, it shouldn't have a red mark where it looks like we haven't participated in that assignment. It should automatically just be a little gray circle next to it after we've done it. And then when we click on it, there's a little box to the right that should tell us how many comments you expect and how many comments we have made, which that's all good. It's just a little red dot, but I don't know how to fix that. That's just from my experience.
Huh. Um, okay. That's
So
something I'm gonna.
just to jump in a little bit, if you hover over the red dot, it says there has been activity here since your last visit. So my assumption is just saying that there's still other students working on that. I don't know if that sounds accurate, but that's kind of what I'm getting from that based on what it says when you hover over it.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense. It could just be perusal and not you specifically, Professor. Honestly, I mean, it is like a new site to a lot of us.
Like,
Yeah.
have you noticed, like, Precious, for example, like when I comment or reply to your comments, that affects the little red dot?
You know what? I did not pay attention to that because honestly, once I make my comments, I don't typically go back and check, which I should, but I don't. So
Okay.
that could be it because I do leave a lot of comments and then I go back like a day later and check. So you could have responded to it and I just didn't see it. I will see it in my email though,
Okay.
but that could be it. I'll pay attention for now.
Okay. Thank you. Linda, you have a hand up?
I do.
Yeah.
So for the BBC documentary, it wouldn't let me watch it through Canvas. So I had to literally pull it up on another tab on my computer. So, but do I need to try to go back and watch it through Canvas to get the points for it?
You should watch it through perusal. Are you able to do that?
It just kept circling for whatever reason. So I literally
Huh.
went to YouTube and pulled it up.
Do you have an Apple computer?
No,
No?
I have an
Okay.
HP.
Oh, okay. I don't know that.
Oh,
I'll try it again, but I did the assignment anyway because I
okay.
watched it through another source, but I will go back and try to watch it again so that I can get the credit for it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand that things have been a little bit messed up with that. And so I'm inclined to just give everyone credit for having watched it as so long as they did the exercise that accompanied the film. Paige, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry to go back to the topic of the red dot, but I was kind of messing with it a little bit. So it looks like that means that there's notifications on that section. So like meaning somebody tagged you in something or
Uh,
responded to your comment because I messed with it a little bit and when I clicked on the notifications, it went away.
so it doesn't mean like
I
that
think it
your
looks like
assignment.
it. Yeah, it looks like it just means that somebody's responded to you and that you have a notification or something of that sort.
So it doesn't mean that it's incomplete, that the assignment is
Correct,
incomplete.
because if you also look, like if they go to their grade book, they can see that that has been graded as well. So that's not connected. It looks like it's more so the notifications.
Okay, so to Karina's original question, I think the key takeaway is that this does not
Does not
an
affect.
indication of incompleteness.
Correct. So like if you even go to the document and just like read, like open it, it'll like take that red dot away.
Thank you, Paige. That's
Of course.
immensely helpful.
Of
Thank
course.
you. I like this. We're kind of all figuring this out together as we go along. It's just like a new era of education and teaching, and we're all struggling to keep up. I am not a technologically proficient person, and as with many of us, the older I get, the more I have a hard time keeping up with technology. So it's a challenge, um, but I think that we're like the light. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think that I feel good about being able to eventually straighten this out. And again, I would be more concerned if like your grades weren't showing up or things weren't kind of getting counted, but I can see just by going into perusal that they are, and that almost all of you are getting like full credit for these things. So I feel like the instructions are clear and the counting system is working. So I'm a little frustrated, but not very worried about it. Thank you to all of you who contributed to our collective self-understanding of this process. Okay. Let me go to the reading then. Let's go here. Okay. So this is like we're kind of taking a deep dive into the German ideology today. So look, the to set this up, um, the most important thing to sort of keep in the back of your mind the whole time in reading the German ideology is that Marx and Engels are basically arguing with like the philosophers of their time. And the philosophers of their time have kind of emphasized that ideas are the most important thing that causes like social change, that causes history to change and move forward, is like having good ideas. So that, to bring it back to the beginning of the class, that is what we saw with the scientific revolution and with the Enlightenment. The idea that if we can just think about things in a better way, You know, if we can think more rationally, if we can think more scientifically, and if we can put all the baggage that has come with religious ideas, if we can put that aside, you know, if we can put like the superstitions and the traditions and the prejudices of religion away and embrace a more scientific, rational world, you know, way of understanding, it's more scientific and more rational way of understanding, then that's going to cause the world to change, and it's going to cause the world to get better. And that was the premise of like the French Revolution. The French Revolution was like, okay, if we put these Enlightenment ideas into practice, you know, then we can create a society of, you know, liberty, equality, and fraternity. That was the slogan of the French Revolution. Likewise with the, you know, American Revolution, you know, that we should be able to implement this higher way of thinking and sort of put aside the baggage of religion. And Marx and Engels basically come along and say, like, no, this is basically these philosophers are overestimating how important ideas are. They emphasize what they call material factors, which is to say, kind of like economics, labor, and the way that economics and labor are organized in society. For them, they think that's the most important thing, is like the material factors matter more than the ideal factors. So they emphasize, in the Communist Manifesto, they will basically say like the history of society is the history of class struggles. The class struggles over material things are the things that make society change and go. That's the fuel, the engine that drives social change, is not good ideas, it's struggle over material conditions, you know, class struggles. Precious, did you have a question?
Yeah, just for clarification. So basically, um, because I was telling my husband what I like about this class, and what you just said reminded me of that. That what Marx is getting at is pretty much the big people, the bourgeoisies, I guess.
Yeah.
They have conditioned us so much to be distracted with things that are, you know, they're not frivolous, and they all hold great power, such as race and social class and just materialistic things, so much to the point that we can't see the big picture of how they're dominating society.
Right.
And if we were to put all them differences to a side, we would unite as one, as the lower poor class, and then we could potentially start some effort forward to making changes to the way the society is structured. But if we primarily focus on individual issues that are minor compared to the big issue, we will continue to have this war back and forth of rich and poor, right?
Very eloquently put, Precious. You're right on about that. And it didn't start with the bourgeoisie. They're basically saying like even in feudal societies, you had an aristocracy that said, you know, what they called the divine right of kings. Like kings were kings because like God had chosen them. And so therefore, like people had an obligation or a responsibility to be loyal and to follow them. Um, and before that, you know, you had societies built on slave economies, you know, and basically the idea is that ideas have been used by the ruling class to legitimate their rule and to maintain their power over the oppressed masses. All right. So whether it's, you know, religion in much of the history of the world, like the church played this kind of role of legitimating the ruling class and maintaining their power. In our times, you know, it might be like the media, the educational system. Certainly religion continues to be an important role, play an important role, but it's not the only intellectual factor in doing that. And so kind of Marx and Engels are kind of saying that like the power of the ruling class gives them the power to define what the ideas are in the society that people are talking about, and now we have this really extreme time where like Elon Musk owns Twitter, the richest man in the world owns Twitter, and he can program his Grok AI to espouse like this kind of white supremacist propaganda. And Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. So the power of the ruling class, the wealth and power of the ruling class gives it the power to define what are the ideas that are taken seriously in society, and what ideas are kind of dismissed as, oh, that's just crazy, or like we can't do that. You see that right now in the New York mayoral election, where Zoran Mamdani wants to do these things like make the bus free, and create these city-owned grocery stores. And the like the Wall Street Journal and all these like organs of the bourgeoisie today are saying like, oh, that's just, we can't do that. That's just crazy talk. And it certainly like could be done. And we can just look at some European countries, for example, where these things have been done. But the concept here that's going to be really key is the concept of ideology. And ideology are these ideas that legitimate and reproduce the power of the ruling class. That is what we specifically mean by the concept of ideology. So I've highlighted several sections here. Just need to take off my glasses to see some of this small print.
Professor, just to carry on about what you were saying before we move on.
Yeah.
I was doing some reading in the new chapter that's coming up, well, the next one after this, and it was saying that basically, I may have misinterpreted it wrong, but let's say that the classes were abolished and everybody was equal. Eventually, the ones that were the poor will become the rich. So basically, the proletarians will become the bourgeoisies, as what happened with the first bourgeoisies, and when they were I guess they were fighting with somebody. I can't remember how it went, but basically it'll always be a class. Is that what he's saying? Like,
no, their future, their vision for the future, and it's vaguely put, and it's more of an idea than a plan, but their vision is that class itself would be abolished. Like there would be no divisions along class. That is their vision of like a good society, is one in which like there is equality. And the way that they put it in a different reading is that let me see if I can remember the quote exactly. Um, Each according to their abilities, from each according to their abilities, and to each according to their needs. So in the good society of the future, everybody would contribute to the society based on their abilities. So some of us are better at other things, some things better than others. Like we would all contribute, and based on like what we can, and we would receive to each according to their needs, right? So whatever our needs are would be met, food and shelter, but also kind of like other existential needs.
is he
We
is he talking about like a fair market exchange where you do the exchange for goods versus the having the money to pay for the goods?
Yeah, so it never, their vision never quite gets that specific. In fact, Marx made fun. There were a lot of people in Marx's times who did try to have like a blueprint, a plan of how a socialist society or a post-capitalist society would look. and Marx made fun of them. He said, like, there can be no cookbooks for the revolution. Like these are things that we can't really design ahead of time. We're going to have to leave it up to the people themselves to figure it out. And it's kind of the supreme arrogance of intellectuals to think that, like, oh, I can sit at my desk and figure out what the good society is going to look like and how it should work. The people themselves are going to have to figure that out. But it can be organized according to this basic principle that everyone contributes based on their abilities and everyone receives what they need, and that can be the metrics of whether we have a good society or not. Like, clearly our society is not one in which people are getting what they need. There's people, outside my door at San Francisco State living in, motorhomes and are effectively homeless. This we
I
see
can't
all.
I can't envision that. Like I'm trying to, but it's hard for me to see what you're saying, if that makes
Envision
sense.
that kind of a society.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Perhaps in part because we've been ideologically conditioned to accept that, like, the poor will always be with us, and that, like, this is just, people are just not going to get their needs met, you know. And so, to be a kind of a revolutionary, I suppose, is to have an imagination of a different kind of world that doesn't exist, like a science fiction, kind of imaginary. And I think that it takes that kind of leap of faith to say, well, we don't live in that kind of world now, but it is possible to envision, a world in which, like, um, people get what they need. It certainly is possible, you know, like, we have enough food, we have enough housing, we have enough resources in this society to meet people's needs. It's a question of, like, how those things are distributed. Why aren't they distributed fairly? Like in San Francisco, there's, like 8,000 homeless people on any given night, but there's 40,000 empty housing units, right? So there's like 5 times as many for every unhoused person. So even here in San Francisco, there's enough housing that people don't need to be homeless. The problem is that a lot of people are, you know, they they buy these, condos or second houses, or a lot of housing just sits empty because it's, a kind of a real estate investment. It's made for profit and not for human need. So yeah, go ahead, Paige.
I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on like the topic of like how you were talking about like we would have, food and clothing and the things that are necessities. If we were to have something like that, is it entirely, I mean, I guess it'd be possible, but is it likely that as a society, people wouldn't really have anything to gain, so that quality could drop? I mean, we already have like a quality issue, but could it drop even more because they don't really have anything individual to gain for themselves out of producing quality products, so to speak?
Yeah, let me see if I have your question right. You mean that, like, what would incentivize people to work?
Not even to work, but to work as well, but to also like, because you say that we would have like food, but we have food because of these companies. So essentially, would they just push out worse quality product because they wouldn't have really a reason to create healthy things or things that would be beneficial? There would be no like you said, incentivizement for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that this is the question of, like, yeah, incentives or motivations, and the idea is that in a capitalist society, everything revolves around the profit motive, right? So companies only do things if they think they're going to make a profit from it, right? And if they don't make a profit from it, even if it's like good for people and good for humanity, or good for the earth, like they're not going to do it because there's no profit. I think that basically Marx, if we dug him up from the grave and asked him today, he would say that there would have to be like a new kind of incentive or structure of motivation, that people would have to be motivated by different things. They would have to be, kind of more motivated by their care for their neighbor or their family or their community, and so that in a revolutionary situation, money wouldn't, matter as much to people. It wouldn't be the thing that people would be kind of chasing. That they would have a different kind of incentives that were more, wanting to contribute and be a part of, their communities, their neighborhoods, this kind of thing. Marx basically believes that we are fundamentally social creatures. We are social beings. We need each other to survive, and we feel good, when we contribute, or when we're a part of something, even if we're not necessarily making money. I'm sure we all have that experience of, you're doing volunteer work, or you're part of a group, or, you just help somebody else, right? And it feels good. Even if you don't like make money on it, it feels good to help people and to be a part of something and to contribute to your community and to engage in like meaningful work, to cooperate with other people. These are things that human beings all over the world have always done, even without like, there being like a financial incentive to do so. And so I think that is, if we dug him up from the grave, that would be kind of Marx's response to that. These are good questions, and I appreciate them. Let
Would
me
you
see what's. Go
would you
ahead.
say that our need to like constantly help, or just just to get the satisfaction of making somebody happy, is like one of our core values that has not been conditioned or have any outside influence? Is just the original way we were meant to be, as far as
In
like,
some sense, I think that they would agree with that. That like human beings cannot survive on their own. They need each other to create the things that they need to survive. They need to work, at least to some degree, cooperatively, and that therefore we are kind of social beings. To be social is, I guess you could say, part of our human nature.
yeah, I said that because I was taking a the prison industrial complex system class last semester, and
Sure.
they had done a study on people that were put in solitude for consecutive amount of times, and the toll that it took on their overall everything, their psyche, everything. And it just goes to reinforce what you were just saying, how we were not intended to be alone, you know?
Yeah. Solitary confinement is a form of torture. For this very reason, it is deeply inhumane. Yeah. It's a real shame on our society that we allow that kind of thing to happen, honestly.
And that private investors can open up their own private prison, just another way for the rich man to get richer, I guess.
Yeah. There's a reason that the private the stocks of the private prison companies like went way up the minute that Trump was elected, because it was like, okay, well, there's going to be this like this deportation, campaign that we're seeing now, that's going to create this increased demand for privatized incarceration, and then this private prison system. It's like once they build the prisons, then it's like, well, they got to arrest somebody for something and put them behind bars for something, like then incarceration becomes part of the business model. I just find it's one of the most absolutely reprehensible things that's happening in our society right now. I think it's disgusting. Anyway, so look, Marx and Engels are trying to kind of ground their theory here in what we might, I suppose, call human nature, or the conditions of human existence. In the next reading that we do, they will call it our human species being, which is to say, kind of like the conditions for us to survive and to thrive as people. So they're talking about this here with, like men can be distinguished by animals, by consciousness, by religion, or anything else you like, but they begin to distinguish themselves from animals as soon as they produce their means of subsistence, a step which is conditioned by their physical organization. By producing their means of subsistence, men are directly producing their actual material life. So what they're talking about in these first two paragraphs is kind of like the first fact of human existence is that we have to work, we have to labor in order to create the things that we need to survive. So before we can think, before we have consciousness, before we have ideas, we must, first and foremost, we must produce. We must labor. And we must labor in a cooperative kind of way. Human beings can't survive on their own. They kind of have to work together to create the food and shelter and the conditions for their survival. And so this is why they're basically saying that, like, economics is primary, material factors are primary, because human beings need to organize their labor and to do it in a social way in order to survive. So this is the beginning of their argument of saying, like, all you philosophers are overestimating the importance of ideas. All of you philosophers, you think that, like, you can just change the world with your science and your reason and all this kind of thing. But the more important thing is how we organize our labor. Our economic system is the fundamental fact of social existence for people. And so this is what they're kind of saying here. Then they, go on to talk about the concept of the division of labor. The division of labor is very important for Marx, and it will also be very important for Durkheim. And so there's basically like how labor is sort of divided in society. So the one of the first forms of the division of labor is like the division between the town and country, which is a division between industry and agriculture. I was really interested to read many of your first exercise where you guys introduced yourselves and talked about where you were from. A lot of you are from agricultural producing towns. I imagine in like the Central Valley in California, and this California is often thought of as like a tech, and finance kind of place, and it is, but agriculture is, this is one of the most valuable agricultural economies in the world in terms of the food, and the things that are produced on the farms. here. So this separation of town and country corresponds to a division of labor between industry and agriculture. And that's a kind of the fundamental thing. And then the division of labor basically becomes more and more complicated over time. And so in this part of the reading, they basically give you like a brief history of how the division of labor, as it's become more complex, has resulted in these different economies. And these economies, the term that they use for it is a mode of production. So a mode of production is basically how labor is organized in society. And so you have, at the first stage, you have this thing, what they call tribal ownership, where basically like everybody, all the property is held in common. Like there is no private property. You see this like with indigenous groups where they don't even have a concept of like, private property, or like the land, belongs to everyone. The livestock, the food, the water, this is all common property. And this is the way that human beings have lived for most of human existence, is in this kind of like existence where there is no such thing as like private property. So they talk about this, like it's sometimes called hunting and gathering societies, people that exist through hunting and fishing, and by meeting their own kind of immediate needs in this kind of way. And the idea that somebody would own the land is just like unthinkable and ridiculous. Yeah, go ahead, Tom. Precious.
Sorry. Not to just go left field, but when you talk about agriculture and animals, there was something that I had learned in a class before, that cows was not always in the United States, that they were brought over here. But are cows created, or were they always here?
They were probably, I would imagine they were brought by the Spanish. And then once they start breeding them, then they take off.
Yeah, because you can trace bulls all the way back to the Aztecs and not the Aztecs, the Egyptians. Is it the Egyptians? The bull?
I don't know.
Oh, I was watching someone Discovery, but yeah, I'm sorry. I just was wondering where they came from.
No worries. Yeah, like this, a lot of, even the things that we think of as natural or nature are actually like socially, are the products of social processes and events. There's so little of nature, something that's purely natural, is few and far between in this world now. Almost everything, in other words, is so-called man-made, right? And so Marx and Engels are going to kind of emphasize that aspect of things, the man-made aspect of things, and the historical aspect of things, meaning that like these changes are cumulative. So yeah, once once cattle is introduced into the North American landscape, it then sort of takes on a life of its own. Those animals start breeding and multiplying.
So not to go on like the topic of the cows still, but is that why like biblically we see a lot of times where it's mostly mentioned that they ate like goat or lamb and stuff like that, because it wasn't like as widespread as it is now?
Probably that was probably, those were probably the animals in that part of the world that were available to people to eat at the time. Like
That's
I'm
really
guessing that.
interesting because like this is the first time I'm hearing something like this. And like I don't know, I guess I just always kind of assumed that they were just always everywhere. They were just like a animal that just roams the earth in every area. That's crazy to learn about though. That's crazy.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't totally know that history. But yeah, we should think of that as like even the things that um, we experience as natural to this day are in fact like the historical product, man-made products, the results of history, you know, um, and something that is like, as we would say as sociologists, something that is socially constructed, you know. So Marx and Engels, really kind of emphasize that perspective, that things are social and historical. So they basically take you through a kind of a brief history of the world, or a brief history of like the modes of production. So we go from this kind of tribal communal property to a stage then where things are kind of become owned by the state and the church. Then we go into a third form of ownership defined by feudal or estate property. They're basically giving you a kind of a history of what leads up to the capitalism that we have today, right? So this is a kind of a short history of pre-capitalist modes of production. And then they kind of define it, kind of wrap it up in a nice bow here in the next couple of paragraphs by saying, individuals, in order to produce, they must enter into social relationships. They must, in one form or another, work with each other. And out of that is where we get our social institutions and our social relationships and the state. These are constantly evolving out of the life process of meeting our material needs. And then out of that is where we begin to find the production of ideas, of conceptions, of consciousness. So what they're describing here is how the material structure of society, the mode of production, determines the forms of consciousness, the forms of belief, the ideologies, right? So that the economic system is like determining, and the ideas, are never independent. Um, Even the best ideas are not simply the result of somebody like sitting under a tree and an apple falls on their head and they have an epiphany. Um, Intellectuals live in society, and their ideas, even the ideas of the greatest geniuses, have to be understood as connected with the larger society that creates them. So at the end of this paragraph, they first use the term ideology as a way of describing an inversion between ideas and reality, a kind of world upside down. They use this metaphor of the camera obscura, which like basically like inverts the relationship between the picture and the thing that it's representing. And then go ahead.
So basically, everything that we are and will be is pulled from various aspects of our lives, basically like a conditioning to get us here. But my main question is that whenever we look back over history and we see issues or complications or anything, there's always a part of religion in there or a church in there. And it makes me question how much of our conditioning is driven from religion versus just actual lived experience, because it seems like there has always been some type of religious dictator to influence the way that life goes.
Right. So especially in more sort of pre-modern societies, it's really hard to separate religion from the church as a social institution, as a like as even an economic institution. Like in feudal societies, like in the Middle Ages, the church was often the biggest landowner, of anyone in society. Like the church, they weren't just like um, dominant in the realm of ideas and values. They were also dominant in the realm of economics, right? Because they're, the ones that own the land. And because they owned the land, that also gave them, more like political power, right? And so the ideas that were being disseminated by, the priests or, whatever kind of religious authority, um, were to sort of like legitimate and rationalize the power of the church as an economic force, you know.
So basically, where I'm going wrong is I'm categorizing the church as its own, but the church has been so implicated in just the evolution of where we are now, apparently, is to the
Yeah.
point that they are part of that lived experience.
Yes.
Okay.
They are not just an ideal factor, but a material factor as well in history, in the development of history. That's for sure. Um, I think that this is nicely their approach is kind of nicely encapsulated in this first sentence here at the where I basically say that they're kind of throwing shade at philosophers who have their head in the clouds and overestimate the importance of ideas. So they say, like, in direct contrast to German philosophy, which descends from heaven to earth, here we ascend from earth to heaven. So they're like, we want to start from earth, meaning like from these material relations, what the work that people have to do in order to produce the things that they need to survive in a cooperative collective setting, right? Whereas the philosophers are always like, they got their head in the clouds and they think like, oh, it's, if you want to change the world, you have to come up with a better idea, and the world, is determined by, these ideas. And they are like, no, we're going to take things down to the level of what they call the earth, but these sort of material relationships of labor, right? Um, and that's similarly when they put this in this nice little pithy sentence: life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. That's essentially kind of saying the same sort of thing, that these economic relations, how the labor is divided, who owns what, who is working for who, for what purpose are people working? Those are the fundamental primary questions that, if you want to know about society, those are the questions you need to ask. How is labor organized? What are the relationships among people? Is it conditions, like of slavery, of feudal peasantry, or in our case, of capitalist wage labor? Those are the things that you have. Those are like the first, most primary facts that you must understand in order to understand a society. So those are good little pithy things to go to look at. So here they're talking more about like some kind of cooperation and some kind of division of labor is always necessary. These relationships and the way that these relationships are organized is the thing that defines society, and what they call the mode of production. So, like, slavery is a good example to think about on this, because slavery is also a way of organizing labor and dividing, and in many societies around the world throughout history, this has been a mode of production that's very different from ours. But it was a way of, organizing labor that kind of defined that society. You know, if the way that your labor is organized is around slavery, that becomes like kind of a defining thing about the society, and it determines its politics. You know, and then you had, like, for example, in America, you know, in the American South, you know, like they would trot out religious ideas to justify slavery, or they would trot out racist ideologies. You know, basically the idea that like certain races were inferior and unfit for freedom. That was an example of like a ruling class using an ideology in order to legitimate its power and its rule. Was they these kind of invented racist arguments, you know, that you know, supposedly pointed out like biological differences between races in order to legitimate the mode of production, you know, in order to legitimate these relationships. So racism is a real good example of what they mean by ideology, you
Is
know.
sorry, just to get clarification. Are what you saying basically like how there's this stigma that that migrant workers will work in the fields for less than, or you know, black
Yeah.
people do Motor City, you know, just like think these ideologies, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So those ideologies at root, you know, what they do is they justify the inequalities in society by saying like, oh, these people, you know, you know, they're in one way or another too inferior to be equal to the ruling elite. You know, they don't deserve freedom, or they're not capable of freedom, or they don't have the moral correctness to be free. That's what they mean by ideology, are basically a set of ideas that reproduce and justify the existing inequalities of society. Yeah. Wanted to make sure to point out a couple of things because we're getting down to the last 10 minutes. You can read the other comments that I've sort of made here, but I wanted to make sure that we got to a couple of key points. Let me just go down here. Yes, this one. So I think this is a very important passage that synthesizes this idea of ideology, where they say the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., the class, which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. So that the power and the wealth of the ruling class gives it the ability to define what are the ruling ideas, what are the dominant ideas in the society. And so the class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. So Marx and Engels are probably thinking here, especially of like the church as a social institution, you know, maybe like the newspapers, the media. In our time, you know, I kind of posed the question of like, what are the means of mental production today? And so things like social media or advertising or the news media, these are all where the ruling ideas that justify the power of the ruling class, these ideas are all circulating, right? So that those who have the power and the money, like Elon Musk, you know, can buy Twitter or You know, Jeff Bezos can use his Amazon money to buy the Washington Post. You know, all of the major media companies, you know, are owned by billionaires. You know, regardless of whether it's like Fox News or a liberal show like, you know, MSNBC. They're all owned by billionaires and multinational corporations. And so all the sort of the dominant ideas that circulate and are seen as legitimate are ones that have the backing of the ruling class. That is essentially what they are saying here. So then that this third sentence says the ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. Notice, just track in your mind the way they keep using that term material and ideal in sort of juxtaposition to one another. The dominant material relations grasped as ideas, hence of the relationships which make the one class the ruling one, therefore the ideas of its dominance. Then in the next paragraph, they talk about the division of labor here. And so one of the, you know, forms of the division of labor takes is the division between like what they call mental and material labor. All right. So that some people, as society becomes more complex, there are some people that basically can specialize in mental labor, you know, so whether they're teachers or priests or, you know, journalists, these people are what they call here like the active thinkers of the society once this division of labor occurs. And so basically, like what they're saying in this paragraph is that this enables a class of ideologues whose job is to produce legitimations and rationalizations of ruling class power. So these are people like, say, you know, Fox News journalists or people that work for the Wall Street Journal or for Forbes or people who are part of think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. These are people that all specialize in producing ideological rationalizations of ruling class power. So that that basically like their job is to tell us how we're all better off because the billionaires are in charge. And if we tax the billionaires too much, you know, then it's gonna cause problems for all of us. Or, you know, we have to let the billionaires be billionaires because they're then the like, I don't know, the wealth will trickle down to the rest of us, or they'll create jobs that will, you know, benefit the 99% or something like that, you know. So this division creates a divide between the mental and material labor. Precious, did you have a question?
Oh, I did, and I had a brain fart. So carry on. Sorry.
It's all good. Okay, let's see. Yeah, that more or less takes us to the very end. We had like a good discussion here about these questions that Precious had raised, but I also wanted to make sure to point this out too, which is that Marx includes himself in this process. He says, you know, the dominant ideas are connected with the dominant class, but also in order to have revolutionary ideas, you must have a revolutionary class. So revolutionaries like Marx himself, you know, it's not like they're just like some brilliant genius, you know, who had these ideas that came to them in isolation. Their ideas are connected with the oppression and the resistance of the proletariat. So, like Marx and Engels, they're very much influenced by the workers' revolts and the upheavals and the rebellions and the strikes that they were seeing in the 1840s. So even the ideas of revolutionaries are connected to the relationships of society. They're never disconnected or autonomous or independent from those ideas. Ideas don't come from nowhere. Even revolutionary ideas are connected to a revolutionary class struggle. So this is an important thing to sort of grasp, is that ideas are always connected to society and social relationships, whether they're dominant ideas or subversive ideas. They're never just like independent, free floating, autonomous things that are just out there in the ether. They're always connected with the struggles that real people are undergoing in society. And so Marx is basically saying, like, yeah, my revolutionary ideas were made possible by the fact that there's this revolutionary class that's out there struggling for freedom. And they influenced him to go kind of beyond philosophy into this realm of revolutionary, like, economic thought, like thought about, political economy and class struggle. So this is an important thing to kind of wrap your mind around, that again, they're sort of, as I said at the beginning of the class, and the thing that I wanted you to overall kind of get out of this was that they're arguing against philosophers who are overestimating how important ideas are. And so they're saying that ideas are always connected to the sort of the foundation of social relationships, to the mode of production, to the way that, like, labor is divided and organized. That's a real kind of key takeaway as far as like what they're trying to do here in the German ideology. Where's the quote again? Just to end this with you. Yeah, if I had to encapsulate this into one quote, it's this one, So the German philosophers descend from heaven to earth, and their approach, what they call historical materialism, is to ascend from earth to heaven. I will say, in a parting comment, that this opens up a debate in sociology that is very long running. And basically the debate is like, what's more important, ideas or economics? What's more important, ideas or like material factors? And you can decide for yourself. There are perfectly respectable positions on both sides of this debate. When we look at Max Weber later in the semester, Max Weber emphasizes ideas. He thinks that ideas, especially like religious ideas and cultural values, are more important in the course of history in creating social change than the material factors. So there's this long-running debate between Marxists and Weberians over this question. Go ahead, Precious. Quick question.
Oh, I was just wondering, how is that a debate? How could you have one without the other? How could you have a material without an idea?
Yeah, so that's an excellent kind of question that we'll have to continue to discuss that. I'm also on the side that yeah, it has to be kind of somewhere in between, and both and instead of either or. But for now, I just kind of introduced this to you as like, this is the spectrum, like the extreme poles, of materialism versus idealism. And in reality, I think most people would say it's somewhere in between. It's just a matter of like which side of the spectrum, you tend to lean towards.
Perspective.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for a good class. Thank you, especially to those of you who are here. I'm just taking down your names. just to make, for attendance
Professor?
purposes here.
You know, my other teacher, they used to have us type our name into the chat. That way you'll just have them to look back over. It'll probably be easier just to throw it out
Oh,
there.
that's a good idea. I think I'll do that next time. For now, just making sure that I have everyone. Page. Okay. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And I'll see you, I guess, or see you Wednesday. Okay, later. Bye.
Bye, Professor.
Take it easy.
Professor,
Oh, yeah.
I had a quick question. Well, I was having trouble with my internet, so I don't know if you've seen, like, I kept leaving and coming back, and I just wanted to make sure that you've seen I was here.
Oh, I definitely got you, Anthony.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And then I
Yeah.
have another quick question. Going back to what you said about how churches not only like held the monopoly over people's ideas, but also like how they had the financial standpoint.
Yeah.
So in that sense, would you say like churches were the first multinational corporation?